Well, good afternoon, listeners. You're listening to Lament of Hope podcast, and I'm your host, Danielle Richardson. And if you do enjoy the stories and the interviews that you're hearing, please do subscribe, as it's a great way to support the podcast, as well as those who come on and are interviewed, so you can see their websites as well as hear more about their life stories. But today I have Jean Lee on the podcast. And I'm very excited to connect with her. It's been a journey for us to connect, but we are here. And Jean Lee wrote a memoir about both of her parents who actually were diagnosed with Alzheimer's, both of them at the same time in their 80s. And Jean Lee really became their sole caretaker for quite some time because her sister lived very far away, like 1,000 miles away. And her sister would come visit periodically and definitely would talk to her on the phone and be a critical support. But Jean Lee did a lot of the physical work before her parents were able to enter a home. And she wrote about her experience with this and the guilt she felt and the difficulty of trying to give respect to her parents while also trying to give them what they needed, which they didn't always understand they needed. And for those of you who have parents or loved ones with Alzheimer's, you'll understand kind of the split personality that happens there. Um, so Jean, I want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing about your story and your book.
Thank you, Danielle, for having me, and thank you to your listeners too for being interested in the subject matter. As I talk, Danielle, please feel comfortable asking questions if I'm not making something clear, or you think of a point that I could make. So yes, as Danielle said, both of my parents were diagnosed with Alzheimer's on the same day at age 86. And that sounds, how could that happen on the same day? Um, it sounds devastating, and it was, but it was not unexpected because my sister and I had been observing oddities in them for about 6 years, and we were seeking a diagnosis. I was the hometown daughter. I live in Ohio. My sister lived in Florida, and she had always been attentive to coming back to visit our parents, and she became my therapist by phone. Um, I called her every time I stopped at mom and dad's house, which was every day. And at that time, I was working full time as a third grade teacher as well, and stopping after work to refill meds, do dishes, check that they had enough food. I lived in a very small town. Everybody knows one another in a small town. They were active in their church and former business people. Um, so it, I did not, as I was going through this journey with them, 6 years of monitoring them in their home before we got to move them, before we got the diagnosis.
Well,
Um,
that's how you kept some of the journal, which you have in your memoir, that people can see you writing down, this is strange, this happened. Because you kept that for quite a while.
yes, thank you for inserting that. So my sister, actually, since she was so far away, she said, Jean, why don't you keep a journal? Because I would call her and say, these weird things happened. And um, she said, why don't you write them down? And then we will have a progression and a timeline that could be used in an assessment or a diagnosis too. So that is the bulk of Alzheimer's daughter, is that journal that I kept, which started out as I became involved in their medical appointments, started out to be things as simple as weights and blood pressures. Then, there are long passages about things that were just odd on any given day or at any given time. So, when jumping ahead, um, when I had to move them out of their home after the diagnosis, um, I was cleaning out their house, which was also, it made me feel very guilty to do that because they were still alive, but it's something that had to be done to pay for their care. So I would stop every day after work and be throwing things in trash bags because it was a situation that they had kept every butter tub and every random lid and every report card that I'd ever had in school, and all of that was kind of rotting in the basement. And so those were definitely the darkest times. But during that clean out, I stumbled upon a box that I had never seen before. And in that box were their World War II love letters. And so I had contemplated writing something using this journal for my family so that they knew our family history of Alzheimer's. Um, I'm an avid reader. I always read to solve problems. Um, and I read everything I could find about people who were writing about a personal journey. And so I thought, well, maybe this would be helpful to someone else, but I really had it in mind mostly for my own family. I joined a local writing group to try to help me write my own story well for my family. And they got a hold of the manuscript and said, Jean, this has a much larger scope than your family. And you really do need to publish this for the sake of other people who are going through the same thing. And at that point, I worked on it 4 more years to finesse it and get it. My writing group helped me, um, make it something that was good. And again, the guilt of we were a peaceful family. Um, we never really disagreed with one another. My sister and I, if our parents told us to do something, we did it. We were a family that didn't have conflict. Uh, we were a family that valued privacy. And I had not revealed this to very many people in town because I did not want to violate my parents' health care privacy in this. Um, so to actually publish this work was excruciating. And I really did think, after having worked on it for 4 years, when I finally pushed the publish button, that I would be struck by lightning and die. And that sounds almost laughable, but truly I did. It was like, am I still alive? Am I still sitting up? Am I still breathing? Um, so since I had read everything I could get my hands on, and there wasn't much of it, so much that is written about Alzheimer's disease is written from the clinical standpoint or specific drugs or specific stages. So the things that it was in the early days of e-readers. So the things that I had read, I had reached out to those authors and, tried to find them and emailed them and said, your book really helped me.
Hmm.
And at one point, Marianne Shuko, who is the author of a beautiful book, Blue Hydrangeas, emailed me back. I had loved her book, and I actually sent her a copy of mine. And I thought she's going to throw this in the trash. She'll never read it. And she emailed me back. She said, Jean, your book is lovely. Would you work with me to elevate and promote books like this written from personal experience um, of lives impacted by Alzheimer's and dementia? People need to have these resources. And I said, well, of course I would. And I don't have Marianne's book here with me because I have given it to so many people. Um, and I don't have a copy of it right now. But Marianne Shuko said to me then, who else have you read? And I had read Vicky Tapia's Somebody Stole My Iron, which was written in the same kind of thought process about losing her mother and father um, to Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and
Hmm.
her journey as a caregiver. So the three of us started to work to gather authors that we had read. And we embarked upon we thought we would do this for 1 month. And we had read enough people. We contacted them. We asked them, would they write a blog post for us? And after the month was over, we thought there are so many more. There are just so many more. We have to keep going with this. And we slowed our pace a bit. Instead of posting a new book every day, we posted one per week. And now we are 10 years into this. And our organization is alzauthors.com, ALZAUTHORS.com. And we have accumulated over 400 authors of works such as this who have written from personal experience. And we only feature books that are written from personal experience. And those live on our blog with links to purchase them. And a couple of years ago, we became a registered 501c3 nonprofit. And maybe 3 years ago, we decided more than a blog post about these books, people would probably like to listen to the author talk about their book. So we started a podcast called Untangling Alzheimer's, which is a link on our website. And our authors are interviewed for about an hour about what was the backstory, what was happening as they were writing their book. So I guess I would say that I can have a smile on my face and speak freely about this now because of the formation of All's authors. And when I published my book and was filled with so much guilt about telling such a personal story, I have been reassured and healed from that guilt because I feel as though my parents now know that I did something really good with this really difficult story by starting All's Authors and being involved in that.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, in your book, what was so keen to me was, yes, the guilt you experienced, but also your internal loneliness in a sense, because your parents were becoming less like the parents you knew. Your sister was far away in another state, so it almost felt like, you were an only child in a sense. I know she was very much supportive, but you kind of on your own in Ohio, and then you would mention your husband as well, but he obviously had work and he worked along with your dad for a while, and so he was trying to figure out how to get the business to continue without him and how to respect him at the same time. So you were at the house alone, like you mentioned, for hours just trying to get things out, and you were talking about the guilt of, should I keep this? Should I not keep this? I don't know what they would want. Um, and I wanted to ask you, looking back now that you've processed and been able to form a community with other people who've experienced what you have, I I wonder, do you regret in any way not having more of a community around you and not sharing more then so that you could feel that support and that encouragement from people who could help you feel validated with the emotions you were going through, and also just providing spiritual support and mentorship for you? Do you think that now looking back, do you wish community had been something that you had searched more earnestly for at the time, or?
That's a great question. And it's interesting that you picked up and you term that internal loneliness because it was a very lonely time for me. Even though I was out every day, working, going to my job, I had to learn to be very efficient with my time because I had to get to work, I had to do my work, I had to get out of there and get to the house to look after my parents. Um, and even though I'm sure there were many people in my work who were going through the same thing, I really only shared my experience with two coworkers. And one of them had lost their mother recently, and another one was going through the same thing I was going through. And I only really suspected it. I didn't even know for sure that that's how my coworker's mother had died or what was going on with this other coworker. But we would walk in to the building in the morning and we got to talking. And I would say to the other woman, "How was your night last night? What happened?" She would do the same for me. So in passing, we became um, just in those few passing moments, we became supportive of one another and a soft spot to land. Because I lived in such a small community, I just didn't feel as though I could talk about it with other people. And as I was cleaning out the house at night, after I get there from work, I really felt as though people were thinking, what is she doing? Getting rid of her parents' things. Her parents have not passed. What's wrong with her?
Hmm.
Um, and I finally got to the point because I would have people say to me, you know, imply that, what are you doing? They seemed fine. Why did you move them? And anyone who knows someone who is beginning dementia or Alzheimer's, they can be fine for 10 minutes of a passing conversation, but by the time you spend 20 minutes with them, something is off.
Yeah.
And so I finally went to two of my parents' dear friends and leveled with them. I said, I need to talk to you. I need to tell you what's really going on. And you're right, Danielle, because when I did, they became very supportive of me. And had I done that sooner, I would have had more support. And it's interesting because, many people in my little town have read this and they will say to me, Jean, we had no idea what you were going through at the time. You just kept marching forward. And
Yeah.
yeah, I think another thing is you don't have time. You don't have time to reach out. It's
Mm.
like I barely I felt like I was drowning. I barely could keep my nose in the air hole, to keep going myself. And the idea of a support group or anything was like, I don't have time for that. And again, living in a very small town, I would have had to drive like half an hour to something like that. But the books I read became the support for me. And I realized somebody else is doing this. Someone else is getting up out of bed in the morning, putting their feet on the floor and going, just going, keep going, going, going.
Well, yeah, I mean, I was so amazed by your energy in a sense. I mean, it was kind of a survival energy because you knew what you had to do. It wasn't so much that you wanted to, and you talked about being so tired and not really. I think even you said that you missed meals because you would forget and there would just be too much to do. Um, I wanted to ask you though, it was interesting because by the end of the book, and when you had finally decided to put your family into a home and then they moving them again to a place specifically where they could be cared for with the Alzheimer's because they would wander and it was no longer safe for them to have independent housing without someone coming in and taking care of them. Um, it was so interesting to see you start to put, and I don't want this to be mean or harsh, and I hope that's not how it sounds to people, but boundaries up for yourself. It was kind of like you went from no boundaries, completely throwing yourself at whatever was needed, to slowly, and it was so cool to see this growth even in your journal of just slowly having to, even when you moved your parents for the final time, like you just did it. You were like, we know they wouldn't like it, but we can't do that because the best way to love them is to just do this, even if they don't give their permission. And just the way that you put those boundaries for yourself so that you could live life still while your parents are being cared for was so important. And I think at least seeing that was an encouragement to me because I mean, I've always wondered if that happened to my parents, what would I do? Or if it happened to someone else's parents. And I have friends right now who are going through that. And it's so hard to have boundaries with your parents because your parents have always been the people to care for you. And suddenly there's that switch, but you're also an adult now, having to live your life while they almost are regressing to a childlike state. And you're having to kind of go the opposite way. And so for you, um, it was incredible to see that boundary journey. And I was just going to ask, do you think that that's very important for people and caregivers who are with family members or loved ones who have Alzheimer's, that they start to develop those boundaries? How would you kind of talk about that with someone who is just starting to experience this with their family member?
The boundaries just were not even conscious. They were not conscious decisions for me. There was a lot of my life to live during this time. My adult children had met their life partners and were getting married. There was such a mix of joy and bittersweet loss during that time. But, and I think in the book, I can't remember how I say it, but I had to fully embrace both. I had to fully embrace the joy and fully let the sorrow in as well. And I think that develops us as people. Also, I think the fact that I was working, um, teaching third graders, 8 and 9 year olds, I mean, that is a high energy thing to do with a lot of management involved in it, but that took my total focus during the day.
Hmm.
So unless I got an emergency call that somebody had fallen and was taken to the hospital, that my work was consumed my full attention, and that work, although it's hard when you're dealing with 8 and 9 year olds, there's so much joy in that too. That you just can't help but laugh with them and reflect and think, wow, they took me out of this today. I got to work with them. Um, and I guess also thinking about the very end of the journey, as things were just so very sad. My dad came to the point who at some points he really didn't know who I was. And all I could do was just go and smile, just be somebody who brought a smile to him. Um, and I remember talking to my pastor about that. I needed just someone to talk to these ideas, talk about these ideas with. And I remember her saying to me at the end of it, when dad died, "Are you going to be okay?" And I thought, yes, I am. I am going to pick myself up and go on and live my life now. And so maybe that gradual boundary setting allowed me to, okay, I did the best I could at this, and now I'm going to live my life.
Yeah. It was it was powerful though because you were very honest about the fact that your emotions didn't always match what you were doing. Sometimes if you told your parents no, or you came and visited them and, you know, took old food out of the fridge or whatever it was, and they were like, "What are you doing? Don't do that." And you still would, but you would also talk about how guilty and, those feelings didn't always match what you were doing. And I think that's just so powerful. I wanted to ask you because you did mention several spiritual phrases and talked about church as well in the book. What, how do you think your relationship with God changed after this experience with your parents?
Hmm. Wow. Um, I'm not sure it changed. I was raised in a family of faith. Um, when I was very young, when I was 2.5 years old, I nearly died of spinal meningitis. And my parents raised me from that point on. They instilled in me that you have been given extra life past the age of 2.5. Make every day count. And that is a powerful way to be raised, to make every day a good day. Do something meaningful every day. And so I think all of my life, I felt as though God had saved me to do something good. And of course, caring for my parents was, you know, just I had to do this because they had been so good to me. So, how did my faith change? I became very uh, close to my faith.
Mm.
I had to rely on it a lot because, as you say, I wasn't doing things that they agreed with. Um, one thing that I haven't spoken about is that since they both were diagnosed on the same day, they declined hand in hand. And one of them couldn't say, my dad couldn't say, hey, your mother doesn't remember how to put the wash in the dryer. My mom couldn't say, hey, your dad is gliding through stop signs. They just thought they were fine. And they stayed in this little, um, almost little love nest together. They just, oh, we're fine. You don't need to worry about us. And they never got cross with one another. That anger was taken out on my sister and I. As you say, when we had to say, no, 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 this can't happen, or you do have to move. You are going to have to move. Um, so I relied on what I felt God was telling me to do to take care of them. And I just hoped I was doing it right.
Yeah. Did you find any s- comfort in scripture at all during this time?
I've always been a Bible reader as well. And I have to say, during that time, I wasn't much of a Bible reader, but I had been involved in Bible studies that had taken me through the entire Bible a couple times. So I had a good background in that. And I kept replaying those things. And there are spiritual references in the book, just uncanny things like after my mother died, my dad's deep faith and in waving at the clouds and saying, I'll be there soon. There were just so many markers of faith in them, even as they declined through the disease. Faith was just a core part of who they were and who they raised me to be.
Yeah. Do you, you know, do you feel any regret about anything you did with your parents that if you meet them again, you would feel afraid to tell them in some way, or do you think that, and obviously this isn't because I think you didn't do something right. It's more for yourself and for your own walk with your parents. If you think there was anything you'd be ashamed or afraid to tell them if you saw them again about how you handled the situation or afterwards or anything like that.
So definitely in 2015, when I published Alzheimer's Daughter, that was a wound in me, a wound upon the wound of having them be ill and losing them. The publication of this private story, I thought would displease them so much. Um, and I really thought the book would grow dust and mold in Amazon's basement. I hoped no one would ever read it except my family. And reviews started coming in, and I would hate to even open the review because I would think they're going to tell me I am such a terrible daughter for having said things like this, to having told these intimate things about my journey with my wonderful parents. That was just such a cloud over me. But I do have to say, in the time past that, and in the association with all authors, and in the beautiful reviews that people have left on the book, and said, thank you so much for sharing this honest journey with me. I know more what to expect now. And I understand that there's guilt in this, and I understand that it's gruesome. And I think the books that we have gathered and featured and feature can be a support group in themselves for someone who's going through this.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think in answer to your question, I did feel guilt, tremendous guilt, and thought when I meet them again, which I completely believe I will they run to me and embrace me or not? But now I know they understand their story had a purpose. And they definitely, I will run to embrace them and they will embrace me back.
Well, I was gonna say, because I feel like, and tell me if this is wrong, but the guilt arises more from seeing your parents as they were with Alzheimer's as opposed to before. Because before, with a rational mind and with being able to process, I think they would be so proud of you. But I think in the Alzheimer's state of mind, it's easy to feel that guilt because they wouldn't understand.
There are just so many things you have to do as a caregiver that so demean the person that you're caring for, like checking the odometer on the car to make sure my dad had not driven more than just to the corner restaurant. This is demeaning for the man who raised me. You know, to
Yeah.
think that my mother could leave her apartment without her blouse on. You know, this is just, these are things that you never imagine will happen to your capable parents. And that it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell those things, but it's the truth. And you can't write something that is Pollyanna about a subject that is difficult. Pollyanna won't help anyone in this situation.
No, it won't. And also, I loved what you said earlier, and you said this in the book too, that you have to embrace the hard and the beauty of life at the same time because that's what life is. It won't always be wonderful. And Lord willing, right? It's not always going to be bad. There's going to be moments of happiness, moments of relief from stress. But life is hard and it's not heaven. And so having to embrace both of those aspects of life with a contentment, which I think by the end of the book, it seemed pretty clear that you had gained. You didn't have that at the beginning, but it was really neat to see how you grew in that. And when your parents passed away, there was just a contentment in the situation. It was definitely sad, Um, but it was beautiful to see how you came to this place of just rest in your soul so that when they did die, you knew that it was best for them and it was good for you. And it was still sad, but their pain was over and they weren't confused anymore. Um, and I even,
Danielle, if I could just interject in that thought, I actually felt incredible joy when they passed. It seems it seems awful to say that, but when they drew their last breath, boy, I stood up and threw my shoulders back. And I remember when mom died, dad was still living. I had to go to the apartment and collect her dentures and her glasses and everything for the funeral director. And I just remember striding down the hall in joy, even though I was going to see my father to tell him that my mother had passed. It was like, she's free. She is free. She's not living in this anymore. And I got to their apartment and my sister and I, we both got to be with both of our parents, even though she lived in Florida. Hospice gave us a window to get her there. We were with both of them when they passed. Um, but we had had my dad in with my mom for a while before she passed, and he he didn't even realize that was her. He thought it was his mother dying. And so we knew we had to get him out of there, take him back to his apartment. And, some of the staff was watching him carefully. And so I went back, to get her dentures and her glasses and that kind of thing. And I said, Dad, mom has gone to heaven. And he said, I mean, this just blew my mind. He said, I know. She was just here. And she told me she'd wait for me there. And he said that as clear as a bell, as far as he was into Alzheimer's. He made that statement. And I knew it had happened, that she had gone to tell him, I'm going, I'm waiting for you. So that was something to really dance a jig about.
I would think so, yeah.
Uh,
Did you, now that you've created this, um, you've been a co-founder of All's Offers and you've been able to reach so many people and publish so many independent authors for them to share their stories. Um, what do you think for you see as a very common theme for the authors who write these books? That what is it that seems to resonate the most or be a very common experience for people who have family members who have passed or are living with Alzheimer's?
that is a great question. And we did an All's Authors live event yesterday where we had four people who had been, it was called the long haul. And I was one of the four we had been caregiving for more than 10 years. And we were asked questions about, what was your overwhelming emotion? You talk about how did you handle the finances, that kind of thing. And you think that your experience is common to everyone who's gone through that, but I don't think there is a common thread
Hmm.
to it because although I felt intense guilt, another woman who I know well and is also a co-founder of All's Authors, the author of Motherhood Lost and Found, Ann Campanella, she felt no guilt in writing her book because her mother had been a journalist and her mother was always, you write what you know and you tell the truth. So
Hmm.
she did not feel any guilt in it. Um, Another man in that event sent said his overwhelming emotion was grief and living through the grief prior to the death. Um, Another person said their overwhelming emotion was exhaustion. And so I think there is no common, even though you think there is no common theme of it, of caregiving, maybe except that somehow you have to come to terms with getting through the negativity of it because it is negative.
Yes.
Oh.
Did you, what do you think for you is the most painful change about your parents? Because you mentioned so many things. I think there was one that really struck me in your book about your father mowing the lawn and he was wearing a plant, potted
Flower
plant.
pot
Yeah, yeah, he
on an
thought it was
empty
his
flower pot.
hat.
Yes,
Yeah,
it was
that
a
was,
sun hat.
I was like, wow, I had never read anything like that before. Just the innocence, it was kind of funny, but at
Hmm.
the same time, it was like, that's really wow, to give a picture of someone who's not thinking rationally. Um, but for you, specifically as the daughter and as Jean, what hurt you the most? The change that hurt you the most for each of your parents?
So the day I took them in to get the results, that which would be their diagnosis, um, I had taken them to a geriatric specialist 6 weeks prior to the um, date that we went back, for the findings. Um, and I had called them the night before, reminded them about the appointment, had it on their calendar. They knew I was coming, and I'd taken the day off of work. I got there and the drapes were drawn, the door was locked, and they were speaking to me through the door. They would not open the door to me. They were not going to go. And their family doctor had, said, well, I would like you to meet with this team of doctors so that we have the best health care for you. And they knew it was not going to be good. And they said, we are not going to meet with the committee. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what do I do? And I called my sister on the phone. She got on the phone with them and she said, you are going to get in the car with Jean. She's taken the day off of work. She's not with her students. You're going to do that right now. And she was often, the faraway sister sibling wants to be the good guy. They don't get to see him very often,
Hmm.
but she was willing to be the bad cop when she needed to be. So we went to that appointment and it was some psychological testing. It made me think about the way kids go through psychological testing in school sometimes. And my mom and dad, they turned 180 degrees. They got to put puzzles together. They got to do these things with the evaluators. They hugged them. Oh, we love you as we're leaving and everything. Happy, happy, happy. So 6 weeks, we have the appointment to go back and get the results. And there, I said, oh, we're going back to the place where, remember, you played games. And, they were such nice people. So they got in the car with me. And we were sitting at a conference table, the three of us, my mom, my dad, and I, and then the doctor. And my sister was on the speakerphone in the middle of the table. And the doctor kindly but logically and bluntly told them they had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's and they would have to either accept help in their home to stay there or move. And my dad would have to stop driving the car. And it was, I've never seen my mom and dad, my peaceful mom and dad, react the way they did. I mean, my dad, I don't ever remember him raising his voice as I was growing up. And he stood up and wanted to fight the doctor, you know. And that was just shocking to me. And my mom, was like, oh, she was just like, I could tell she just wanted to wash that guy's mouth out with soap. How dare, how dare you say that about us? And so I think for both of them, that was the most shocking thing is how they were just so, it was like an affront to them. This cannot be true. And honestly, Danielle, the word Alzheimer's was never spoken between us again. It was just too, it was a slap in the face. They couldn't handle it.
Yeah, I remember reading that in the book. It was very poignant. It was very sad. I think you said, if I remember correctly, you your sister, you weren't sure how she was taking it because she was still on the phone and your parents were leaving, so you had to follow them.
Yes.
And you're like, I wish my sister was here and could
Yeah.
come with me.
Yeah. 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 We just kind of, mom and dad wanted to fight and bolted for the door, and I followed him out. And I thought, she has no idea what's happening here.
I
And it
have
was
to say
until
though,
hours later that I got to call her and fill her in on what had happened.
I have to say though, you were blessed with an amazing sister. I
Yes,
think I had never read or have experienced a sibling that loyal and mature and thinking in mind and very present, even though she wasn't physically with you, which was incredible. That was such a gift from God to give you a sister like that. Um,
for sure. And so many of the books that we feature, the people who write about this journey, so many of them have strife with a sibling.
hmm.
They don't get along, they can't agree, they don't get the help they need. And you're right, Danielle, I was so lucky to have her in my life.
Jean, I wanted to ask, kind of to finish up the interview here, how can you comfort people who have just recently, what kind of comfort advice would you give to someone who's recently found out their father or mother has Alzheimer's and they're in the stages of preparing for the end, knowing that that's going to be the ultimate for that person and seeing them start to be denied the things they usually were accustomed to and seeing them lash out and hearing those nasty words that they might say at times. How would you comfort and advise them as they're just beginning this journey of an end in a way and an end of the relationship they once knew with their parents?
I would say you will make it through. It may not feel like it, but you will make it through. I don't know how, I can't predict that, but know that you will. And however you choose to take in advice from other people who are in your same situation, do. If you're a reader, read everything you can. Go to All's Authors, check out those books. Listen to our podcast, Untangling Alzheimer's and Dementia. There's so many resources there that are hand in hand with All's Authors. Um, and, when you're driving on your way to work, listen to a podcast about it. Um, and if you have time to join a support group, where you really can actually be in the presence of other people, I mean, that's really good as well. I will say there is an emphasis on self-care. Oh, you must have self-care as you're a caregiver. I just did not find that to be true for me. There was no time for it. My self-care was getting up and going to work every day. and
Hmm.
just distracting my mind from my parents. But um, I just I did not find that for me anything like, okay, I'll go schedule a manicure or massage. I mean, that would have been so temporary for me. I would have just stepped right back into the stress of it right after that. So that did not make sense for me. But hearing the journey of others and knowing that they kept going and they made it through is what enabled me to keep going and making it through. So seek the words of others in this journey.
Hmm. Well, Jean, I'm so grateful, first of all, that I found your memoir, which I love, and the fact that there is this resource of caring individuals who really want to come together to support others and to support each other, which I think is just absolutely beautiful. Um, and so I'm so grateful that I came across your memoir and that I got this chance to talk to you, read your book. And for listeners, I will have a link to their website. There are so many resources on there. I was exploring it earlier today and just getting to see that they have a podcast and that they have a blog and that they have means of contacting them so that if you have something you've written or if you want to talk to somebody, there's just so many resources on that website and it's just such a friendly, open, and um, it's a strange word to say, maybe to use, but in a sense, a private place and a safe place because it's not a huge corporation. It's a small nonprofit and it's made by people who know exactly what you're going through and understand the pain of Alzheimer's and just want to be a community and form a community for you. And so I highly encourage you if you're going through this or this is something that maybe you or loved ones are going through a diagnosis of this, or maybe if you feel that, maybe you personally have recently found out about Alzheimer's and you would like just means of encouragement and maybe getting to listen to the caregivers and getting to listen to other people's experiences might be helpful and encouraging for you, then I highly do recommend that. And obviously to get
Oh,
Jean's book. I think
oh,
her book's amazing.
thank you. And you made me think about something I'd like to say too. Probably 10% of the books on our website are written with people who are going through Alzheimer's and dementia themselves.
Hmm.
And they're writing their own journey. And their words are so important for caregivers to read, or for those who have recently, received a diagnosis that, okay, I can still keep going and I can let the world know, learn about this through me. So I think we kind of often, there's one side of the fence or the other, either the caregiver or the person with Alzheimer's and dementia, but we try to bring those words together because they're all powerful for people whose lives have been impacted in one way or another.
Yeah, I highly agree. Well, Jean, thank you so much. This has been such a gift, and please stay warm. I know you said it's cold in Ohio. It's cold here. Spring will come.
Yes.
But thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Danielle. I greatly appreciate talking to you and your audience. Thank you for inviting me and for reading my book.
You are so welcome. Thank you.